Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another MoGraph Monday, demystifying post-production. My name's Ellie, I'm a trainer at Maxon, and I'm joined by three very special guests again, Dustin Malcolmer, Lionel VC and Chad Perkins. How's it going, guys? Happy Monday.
Happy
Hello.
Monday.
How are you too?
Happy Monday. And happy Monday to everyone in the chat already. So hey to Charles, hey to Enno, Janet. How's it going? It's good to be here with you all on this lovely Monday. So before we get into what we're going to be doing today, as always, I like to talk about the great events that we have going on as a whole Maxon collective. So if you head over to the Maxon, like the main website here, you go to the events page, you can see all the great stuff that we have going on, all the live sessions, events, webinars, all the great stuff from today's demystifying series, which you can see on there. And then on Thursday, so every second and fourth Thursday of the month, I have to get my timings right on this, we run a Ask the Trainer live session over on YouTube, and we're running another session on Pyro because the last one was so popular, everyone had so many questions, we thought, hey, why not do another one and answer even more of your questions? And then on the alternate Thursdays, so first and third, we run or Max runs his very own color grading show, Max on Color. And then of course, the amazing VFX and Chill with Seth and Hashi. And yeah, so feel free to check out the events page. You can just register for those and get notifications in your emails so you don't ever miss any of them. But if you do ever miss any, then don't worry, because we've totally got you covered, because all of our sessions get recorded and they get uploaded onto our very special Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, which is here. So you can see all the upcoming live streams. So Ask the Trainer and Max on Color get hosted on here. So you can notify yourself for those, and you can see all the other uploads that we have, and they're also timestamped thanks to Dr. Sassy. So thank you so much, Dr. Sassy, for doing that. It really is invaluable. We do appreciate it. And finally, as a thank you, inside the handout section of GoToWebinar, you can find this PDF here, which has a super special merch link, because we like to give away free t-shirts as a thank you for you being part of our wonderful community and being part of these live sessions that we do. All you have to do, click that link, type in the password, which is MoGraph Mondays, and you can get a free shirt. All you have to do is pay for shipping. And then on that same link is all the stuff that we've just seen, so the events page, the training team YouTube, and also we've been putting together project files for each of these demystifying months. And so you can find Lionel's from week 1 and 2, and then I'll get my stuff on there by probably tomorrow morning, depending where you're from. So today I'm taking over. My turn to try and do some MoGraph magic for you guys. So let me switch off my camera so I can get into a big screen of what I'm going to be doing today. And don't forget, you've got the guys here in the background. So if you have any questions based on anything, then they're absolutely the masters. And some of them I can answer live as well if you want to do that, guys, and that is totally cool. So the plan for today is, we're talking about MoGraph, and I'm going to be staying in Cinema 4D Lite for this. That is the main focus. So we have a bit of a link between After Effects and Cinema 4D. And so I've got my composition here, and I want to just show you how you could access it first of all, because not everybody knows that you have Lite for free inside of After Effects. So the way that you could access it is by setting out your composition. So I've just got a standard comp here, 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second, and it's about 7 seconds long. If you go to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file, what do we call this? MoGraph Monday Live. Just name your C4D file and then hit save. And what it's going to do is it's going to open up Cinema 4D version 26. Yes, I know that is not the latest version. I don't think there's anything I can do about that. I'm really sorry. I don't know when it's going to be the 2023 version, but hey, there's still some great stuff that we can do inside of 26. And here we go. We now have access to Cinema 4D Lite, and we can now start working. And to prove to you all that this is the Lite version, if I open up my menus, you can see, look, we're 100% only working in Lite today. I'm not going to cheat and be like, oh, I'm going to use the full version. We're all going to be working in Lite together. And so, yeah, the plan is to show you a bunch of quick MoGraph techniques that can be easily achieved in C4D Lite by thinking a little bit outside of the box and also looking at combining it with the other Adobe tools like After Effects, like we've just done now, Illustrator and Photoshop. So it's some of the techniques I looked at for Adobe Max. What was great, those sessions weren't recorded. So we are actually looking at doing tutorials, but I thought, hey, why not show some of them now to all of you lovely people? So the first thing we're going to do is I've actually got a couple of things here that I put together, just some super quick renders of the kind of things that we want to look at doing. So this one here is creating a bit of a MoGraph text setup. So it's all based off like Nike stuff. So the Nike logo, just do it. They're like tagline slogan. It's a whole sort of series I did. And this is what we're going to look at doing. It's creating this text. And it actually uses a couple of different techniques that aren't always shown or talked about when it comes to C4D Lite. So first of all, we're going to look at how we can actually create 3D text. We're then going to look at creating duplicate versions because we don't have a cloner, but there is a little trick we can use of instancing. We're then going to look at how we can create this animation, and then also we're going to look at how we can do this color effect. So as our letters come up, it starts off this sort of deep purple, and then once they're completely sort of raised up, they turn into this neon blue. And so it's going to be a bunch of different techniques all creating this one animation. And then again, we can look at how we can bring that back into After Effects. So that's going to be the first part. So yeah, let's just start creating. I'm going to show you how quick and easy this stuff can be. So the first thing we want to do, let me just move that over there so it's not in my way. The first thing we want to do is we want to actually create our text. And so how do we do that inside of C4D? Well, all we have to do is come into this menu here, and we can grab what's called a text spline. So think of a spline, if you're not used to Cinema 4D, think of a spline as like a path inside of Illustrator. And then we come into our text spline and we can pretty much change all the aspects that you're probably used to inside of text. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually just write our tagline, which is going to be just do it. So you can have this say whatever you want. If you're following along, literally, yeah, write whatever you want in here. I'm going to go to my front view, and this is going to help me just sort out and fix my alignment and the size of my text straight away. So inside my text, the first thing we want to do is we want to pick a little bit of a nicer font. So let's go Futura Bold, and let's just adjust the size, which is going to be the height of my text. So if we just change that to 100 centimeters and get a little bit closer, we can also adjust horizontal spacing and vertical spacing. So if I pull this in, we can get this a lot closer and make it look a little bit neater. But if we come a little bit closer now, we can see our alignment. Even though we're set to the left, our letters aren't perfectly in line. And we can actually adjust the kerning of this text really quickly by just clicking this button here, this little button here, saying Show 3D GUI. And if I just click this one here, I can pull it along, and I'm just going to eyeball this quickly just to make sure my alignment is correct. And now to get to the next letters, we can drop this down and we can just pull this along. And now we've got our I, and I can pull that along as well. And now if we come out, we can see it just looks a little bit neater because we now have that fixed alignment. Cool. So we have our text spline in here. Let me just turn off my work plane. So what else can we do in here? Well, we can hide our kerning, and we can control the plane of our text. And so we have X, Y, which is, so we've got X, we've got Y, and we've got Z or Z, depending on where you're from. And we want it to be positioned on the floor. So our sort of like our floor axis is our blue and our red, which is our X and our Z axis. Cool, so now we're getting a little bit closer to the look of that, how this sort of looked here. They're sort of like on the floor. But how do we turn this into 3D geometry? Because if I hit this little render button, so the little button here is going to give us a render, and we can see we're not actually seeing anything. And that's because this is just a spline. It's not actually 3D geometry yet. And so in order to turn this into 3D geometry, we need to use some generators. And these little green guys here, these are going to help us generate some kind of geometry. So to do this, we need to grab an extrude. So this one here, basically what it's going to do is going to take our spline and it's going to extrude it out and give it some 3D depth. So if I drag and drop that into my extrude, let me just change my icon size. We now have 3D geometry. And so in the space of like a matter of clicks, we now have some text geometry inside of Cinema 4D Lite. And inside our extrude, this is where we can control different elements. So we can control our parameters. So we can adjust the offset, which is, I like to call it depth, because that's pretty much what it is. It's the depth of our geometry. And then inside of our caps, if we come in here, we don't really have like a lot of beveling going on. We don't have any at all, actually. And so how can we really quickly add some of that? Well, we can do that inside of our caps. We have beveling options, and we can add the size of our bevel, and now we have some nice rounding on the edge of our geometry. We even have presets as well. Yeah.
Can I jump in and ask you a question?
Absolutely.
This is just pretend it came from the chat. It's really my question, but pretend it came from the chat. So why would you use a text spline and extrude when there's like that new like 3D text object? It used to be like the MoText thing, right? Where it's just kind of like 3D and text in one automatically. It's like one of the.
So inside of Lite, you don't have that. You don't
inside of Lite, you don't have that.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, absolutely. If you're using, that's a valid point though. If you're using the full version of Cinema, then yes, inside of this menu, I'm pretty sure this menu, you also have like full 3D text. But yes, in Lite, we have to do our little workaround.
Gotcha. I swear on my mom that that's not like some secret commercial to upgrade from Lite. I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
Me and Chad spoke about this beforehand. He's lying. So yeah, this is absolutely the workaround. And what's nice about this is we're going to be using this method when it comes to creating logos as well. So it's not just kind of text specific, which is handy. So cool. So we have, we've created our text, we've created our text spline, and we have like full control still. We can change this, change our fonts and etc. But let's move on to like the next part of this kind of creating this animation. So we have our just do it text, or we have whatever we've just created here. There's a little trick we can do that's called instancing. So unfortunately, we don't have access to a cloner inside of C4D Lite. However, we can do some little hacks and some little workarounds to still speed up our workflow and to still generate like duplicate copies or clones of a setup. And so what we can do, if I select my extrude, so let's call this my 3D text, or apparently $D 3D text. And with that selected, come into my menu again here, so my generators, and we have something called an instance. And if I let go, you'll probably think, hey, nothing's actually happened, Ellie. However, we do now have an instance or a copy of that 3D text. All I need to do is just move it over. And the reason that this is powerful and interesting inside of C4D Lite is because now whatever I do to my original, it's going to update in my instance, sort of similar to how it would inside of like a cloner. So if I come into my 3D text and come into my text spline and say, oh, actually, you know what, let's change our font, what you notice is it updates on our instance as well. So if we take this knowledge and this information, we can use it to create a grid type text, which we can then animate and turn into MoGraph geometry. And then very quickly, we've got a really kind of like stereotypical Cinema 4D MoText setup, but inside of Lite. So for speed purposes, okay, let me figure out which, what did I name it? Here we go. So for speed purposes, I just created this base setup, and it is exactly what we've just created. So it is our text spline here with everything that we've just set up inside of an extrude. And then all I did was instance it 8 times. And now we have a 3x3 grid setup. So this is exactly what I've done. I just also set up a plane which is our floor. So if I disable and enable that, you can see we have that, and we've got a little camera going on. And so now what we can do is we can take this setup and we can turn it into MoGraph geometry, and then that's going to enable us to use our effectors to have a control of position, scale, and rotation, and then we can animate that. And then in a short space of time, we're going to have created a pretty cool looking animation inside of Lite. So how do we turn this into geometry or MoGraph geometry? Well, down here, this little icon here, this is our MoGraph menu. And in the full version, we're very blessed because we have a lot of lovely tools inside of here. But luckily enough, in Lite, we have the fracture, and the fracture is exactly what we need in order to create MoGraph geometry. So if I grab my fracture, what I want to do is I want to take all of my instances, so all of my different pieces of geometry, and I'm going to drag them and drop them inside of my fracture. And inside of here, I do want to change my mode. So by default, it's set to straight. So what straight's going to do is it's going to see each individual instance or each individual setup as one piece of geometry. So if I animated them, each thing would be animating as an individual piece. But if I change it to explode segments, now every single letter is going to be able to be animated separately and individually and seen as separate MoGraph geometry. So how do we now animate this? What can we do? Well, actually, the first thing I'm going to do is, because I want to create that effect of our letters coming out from underneath my plane on my floor. So the first thing we need to do, we actually want to move all of these down so they're underneath my plane. So if I move them down, we can see they've disappeared, but they're under here. They're still there, don't worry. And now what we can do, we can use our effectors to create that animation. So if my fracture selected, I can come into my effectors. And again, we only have a limited amount. We only have the plane and the random, but with these, we can still create interesting things. So if I grab my plane effector, oh, my text has reappeared. How come? The reason for that is because if we go to the parameter, what it's doing is it's pushing all of my individual like just do it letters up on the y-axis by 100 centimeters. So if I switch that off and switch that on, we can see what it's doing. What we do want to do, at the moment, they're now floating above the floor. So we want to make sure they're only going up by a certain amount. So let's go maybe like 40 centimeters. And so I don't mind this intersection. It doesn't bother me. But if you wanted to, you could make it so it just goes to the perfect line. But let's stick to 40. So what's happened is it's taken all of my letters, all my MoGraph geometry, and the plane effector is pushing it up on the y-axis by 40 centimeters. That's great. But the thing is, if we animate the strengths, we're not getting the same kind of animation. So how do we do it where we can have a different influence on our different setups over time? And the way that we do that is by using fields. So fields are going to enable us to animate this effect on or off across certain aspects of our geometry. And the best way to kind of understand that is to visualize it. So let's grab ourselves a linear field. So all I did was select a linear field in here, and it's added it to our fields menu. And now already, if I start to move, so we've got this little box in here, hopefully you guys can see that clearly. We now have this, what we call a bounding box, and it's controlling this effect. So what's happening? So everything to the left-hand side isn't being affected at all, which is why it's still underneath our floor. Everything to the right-hand side is being 100% affected, so it's being pushed up on its y-axis, and everything in between is having a gradual or linear effect from 0% to 100%. And so as we move our linear field and as we animate our linear field, we're able to create this really interesting animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rotate this slightly. So we have this coming in at a 45-degree angle, again, just to add a little bit of variation. So let me take my linear field and just slightly reposition it to the center, and then let's rotate it 45 degrees. Now, as I move it all the way to the corner, we can create this type of effect. However, the thing is, in the original, our text starts underneath and then comes up. Whereas we can see here is it's starting up or affected, and then it's being pushed down. So how do we fix this? Well, it's nice and simple. All we need to do is go into our linear field and control the direction that our linear field is facing. So at the moment we have a positive X. If I just change it to negative X and then start to move it, we're getting a better looking animation like the one that we did in the final. Cool, so from here, how do we actually set up our animation? Because I mean, we can all agree it's not ideal that I'm just moving it along this handle here. So we need to set up some keyframes, and we're going to set up just 2 keyframes for this animation. I'm going to come to the start of my timeline, so on frame 0, and I'm going to pull my linear field all the way up until everything is kind of not affected or out of shot. And in my linear field, in my coordinates, I'm just going to keyframe these 2 here. So this little button here, by the way, is a keyframe button for anyone who doesn't know. Just got to click that, it goes red, and now we've set up some keyframes. And then at frame 150, I'm going to pull this all the way down, and then I'm going to set some more keyframes on those same transform position coordinates. And now if we go back, we have set up the start of our animation. So from here, how can we again use different techniques to make it a little bit more interesting? Well, we can actually combine multiple fields together to add some more variation to the way that our text is being affected. So inside my plane effector, inside my fields menu, we have, if I click and hold, we have other field options. So we've already used our linear field, which is what's creating that animation. If we grab a random field, what it's going to do, it's going to randomly reposition our letters based on this 40 centimeter parameter. And so what we can see, we now have some that are a little bit lower and some are a little bit higher. However, it's actually overtaking our animation. And so even though we've set up that initial linear field, the random is actually overtaking that. What we want to do is we want to combine and blend these things together. And so the way that we combine them together is back in my fields menu, we have blending modes or blending options inside of here. And they are similar to blending modes that you're used to in other software packages like Adobe Photoshop and things like that. So if I set this to overlay, I set my random field to overlay, what it's doing, so we're still getting that accurate animation, but as we sort of like pull it along, we're getting a nice bit of variation on our text. As each individual letter comes up, it's got its own sort of varied effect. And then they're still going to end at that 40 centimeter cap as soon as that comes across. And so really quickly, we've just turned this simple piece of text into a bit of a MoGraph animation. And then remember, because we're using instances, at any point we can come in and we can update everything, and our animation is going to stay exactly as it is. So another quick thing on here that I wanted to talk about before we move on to the second setup or any questions is how we can get this color. So there's something called MoGraph color in Cinema 4D, and we don't have access to it inside of Lite. We do in this sense, but let's say I wanted to use this to control my luminance, or I wanted to create a glossy material and also have this MoGraph color. Well, then there's a little workaround that we need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually set up the color. So in my plane effector, in my parameter, my color mode is set to fields color. So if I go into my field and go into my linear field, I can actually adjust what's called my color remap. So at the moment it's set to this reddish color. So what it means is my effect comes across, or my linear field comes across, you can see we're getting this gradient color happening. What I'm going to do, I'm going to change this to gradient. and I actually set up a preset. So I'm going to load a preset. Oh, load a preset, and I've got this one here, which are the colors that I set up in that original one. But now, how do we take this color and how do we combine it with, let's say, luminance? Well, what we do, let's just create our base material first. Let's create like our floor blue just by double clicking and changing the color. And I'm going to drop that on here. And then we're going to create another material. And this is the one we're going to use for our letters and for our luminance. But if I drop that on my fracture, you'll notice that our color, our original gradient, disappears. So how do we pull this back? Well, double click your material and it's going to open up our standard material editor. And then inside the color, this little texture option, we can drop this down and we can go to surfaces and display color. And now we can see we get that color back. How do we combine it with luminance? All we have to do, enable luminance and do the same thing, surfaces, display color. And now we've got that gradient color from our plane effector, so from our MoGraph setup, but it's now inside of my material. And the final step of this, because I do want to move on, is just a final bit, which is how do we get this color so it only is on this part of my text? Well, nice and simply, inside of our generators, so inside of my original extrude, we have a selections option. And polygon selections are going to allow us to add or apply certain materials to certain aspects of our geometry. So we have shell. The shell is this outside area, so these sort of like side bits here. The cap is the top and bottom face, and the bevel is that bevel that we set up here, so that nice little rounding. So what we want to do, we're going to throw our material on here. And we want this one to only be on this front cap. So if we go back to our extrude, inside of our selections, our start cap code, our little secret magical code that we need, is C1. So if I go back to my material, inside of my selection, if I type in C1, we now have my luminant material on everything except the cap, the top cap, which now has this blue material. And as we play it through, this is the setup that we have created. And so I did also want to talk about how we can make it come back down, but it's a similar style. You can just create another plane effector that makes everything go down. And so let me just save this. I want to talk about the connection with After Effects. So let me save this as the final version. Save. If I come back into After Effects, what I can do, so when we first opened up C4D Lite, we created our C4D file, right? And that's this one here. And what we can do, we can drag and drop that in. But what I need to do, because I've worked on a second file, I need to actually throw in that second file just inside of here, drop that in there. And then I can drag and drop that into my After Effects comp. And now we have our animation is going to have a little think about it, and our link inside of After Effects. And this is really cool because now whatever I do inside of C4D, if I save it, it's going to update immediately inside of After Effects. And this is how we render out inside of C4D Lite. So if you have the full version of Cinema, you're good, you can render out of there if you want to. But if you don't, you can't actually render out of C4D Lite. You have to bring it back into After Effects. We can then go to our effects control. So CINEWARE is like the link between these two things. And you're probably thinking, Elly, it's looking a little bit strange, like it's looking a little bit like the viewport. And the reason for that is because by default, when you bring in your C4D file into After Effects, the renderer is set to viewport draft. And this is really handy because it plays back really quickly. Any changes you make in C4D update really quickly in After Effects. But as you can see here, it's not the best looking of things. And so if you're finished and you're ready to render out from After Effects, all you need to do is change your renderer to current. It's going to think about it for a sec. And now we're getting a much nicer looking design, a much more accurate looking final render. And then we can render this out. And then we'd get something really similar to what we had here. So do we have any questions on that before I go on to the next setup?
Nope, I don't think so. I think everything is like super clear and amazing.
Cool, cool. So I know some of this, if people are, used to using Cinema 4D or advanced C4D users, some of this might be stuff that you already know, but hopefully if you're only in Lite, or if you're looking to add 3D to your workflow, or you're maybe like a 2D artist, hopefully a lot of these techniques you can see, it doesn't involve you having to have years and years of C4D experience. This stuff can be done really quickly and really easily inside of C4D Lite.
Oh,
So
Ellie, actually, there have been a couple questions that came in that I missed. So
yeah, sure.
people are wondering about adding multiple items to, like, if you wanted materials to apply to multiple things, like if you were in the tag, the selection tag for the material, or the selection area in the material tag, like can you add multiple spots? Like, you could do like C1, C2, S. Could you add multiple things to the same field?
No, so what you'd need to do is, say for example, I wanted this to be on like this and like the bevel. I'd need to throw that same material on and then just do, is it B for the code? R. Okay, so I then need to do like R1. And so you can't have multiple selections in the same material tag. So all you have to do, throw on the same material and then add the selection you want in that second one, sort of like that.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Yeah. I will let you know if you all that had the question, if you have any more follow-ups, and let me know in the chat.
Cool. Cool. All right then. Cool. Let me move
Thanks, Ella.
on. No worries. Let's move on to a bit of a fractured logo effect. Let me get my fine. Also, just to kind of point out, like, I'm a real advocate for Redshift. This rendered in 5 minutes. this thing here, this rendered in 5 minutes, and that to me was like amazing. So another kind of win for this kind of setup. Cool, here we go. Right, so this is a little animation I've been working on, and it's also based on a tutorial. Like, if anyone's seen my Instagram, you've probably seen me talk about this and teasing this a little bit. So let me just play this through. This is a really kind of fun and easy animation, and that's kind of the whole point of today. And I'm going to show you how we can do this. So this uses, again, a bunch of different techniques. First of all, it takes a logo from Illustrator. So again, talking about, that combination between different software. So Adobe Illustrator and C4D Lite now. And then we can use the same kind of MoGraph setup to animate this. And then, I mean, if people want to see the shoelace, I can do the shoelace as well. That's no issue. But yeah, this uses, again, a couple of different techniques all inside of one quick animation. And I'm going to show you how we can do this. So I'm just going to work again inside of this same, like this inside of C4D Lite, because I've already shown how to get it into After Effects and render it. And I want to keep this MoGraph focus and keep it inside of C4D Lite. So here we've got this little Nike swoosh logo. I mean, some of you may know it, you may have heard of it. And so you can do this process I'm about to show you with any logo, with your own stuff you've created inside of Illustrator. You could even use like text inside of Illustrator. Just all you have to do, follow these rules, and then you can do whatever you want with your logos. So inside of Illustrator, this is just a simple path. It is just the Nike swoosh logo with a stroke. That is all it is. If you're working C4D Lite and you want to bring a logo into, or want to bring an Illustrator file into Cinema 4D, it has to be saved as Illustrator 8. So all you have to do is go File, Save as Illustrator 8. If you're working in the full version of Cinema 4D, then you don't have to save it as Illustrator 8. You can save it as Illustrator 2020. So I just wanted to point that out because I've already got these things saved. And the way that we bring this into Cinema, it's nice and simple. Where's my light? This one here. We can, I have it somewhere here, do I? Maybe I don't have it here anymore. Okay, let me find it. Oh, where did I save this? You're all going to experience my lack of organization here. Here we go, MoGraph Monday. Oh, not so disorganized. And I'm going to drag and drop my AI file, so this one here. inside of Cinema 4D, and it's going to say, hey, it's Illustrator 8, cool. And we're going to press OK. And then now what we have is we have this logo, so this path that we've just created, and it comes in again as a spline. And so just like our text, we can now convert this logo, or any logo that we have, into 3D geometry. But first things first, I'm going to create a cube, and the reason for that is when this is kind of like a recommendation when working in this way or creating MoGraph style setups inside of C4D. It's best practice to work inside of C4D's default sizing. And what I mean by that is, if we throw in a cube, which we've just done here, its default size is 200 by 200 by 200. And certain elements and aspects of Cinema 4D have default settings already set up. For example, the extrude is set to 100 centimeters by default, and then effectors are roughly set to 100 centimeters as well. And so what that means is it's kind of handy to work with Cinema 4D's default sizing. And we can see this Nike logo is a bit teeny tiny in comparison to this cube. So all we have to do is scale up our Nike logo. And this isn't like you absolutely have to do this. It's genuinely just like a recommendation. And so if I get rid of my cube, we now have this Nike logo as a normal Cinema 4D sizing. And now if we use that same method we did before with the text and we extrude it, we can see that that default extrude offset isn't too far off what we're hoping for. Whereas if we'd left it its original size, it would have gone a little bit crazy. And so this is the way that we bring in our Illustrator files inside of Cinema 4D, and then we can turn them into 3D geometry. And if you're wondering why that's beneficial, why that's useful, well, because once we have 3D geometry, as we've just seen in the last scene, we can animate it. So we can start to add different aspects to our sort of design portfolios by incorporating not only 3D, but 3D animation. But now we want to talk about thinking outside of the box, because as we said, light is limited. We know that, and that's fine. And so how can we think outside of the box to still generate and create interesting looking animations nice and quickly? So with this logo, there are things we can do. We can animate position, scale, and rotation. We can use what are called deformers. So inside of here, we have different deformers, so we can bend, we can twist this logo. But how can we use Illustrator or our knowledge of Illustrator to help us to create a more interesting animation? So goodbye, original logo. We don't need you anymore. Because what we're going to do inside of Illustrator, if we did something really simple, and so this, I'm showing you my lack of Illustrator knowledge here. All I did was take that logo, take that original logo, and I cut it into 3 pieces. So these are now 3 separate pieces. So what that means, when we bring this file into Cinema 4D, it comes in as 3 different splines. Therefore, we can turn it into 3 different pieces of geometry and animate those pieces at separate times. And so by just doing one simple thing in Illustrator, already we can now create a more interesting animation in Cinema. So I was originally going to do this, but I thought, hey, why not take it a little step further and completely draw a load of crazy lines inside of Illustrator? And that's pretty much what I did. And so now, with the knowledge that we have, we can now bring this into Cinema 4D, turn it into geometry, turn it into MoGraph geometry, and then create a really interesting fracture animation inside of Lite. So let's do that. So let's come back into Lite. Let's open up a new project, and let's find my Illustrator file again. Here we go. So let's drag and drop this inside of here. And then now we have that inside. Okay, so I need to just delete this little dude here. We don't need that one. So let's do the same thing we did before. We're just going to center this out, and we're actually going to make it bigger to make sure it is the same kind of default sizing. So hold T, and we're going to scale it up. Cool, so let's go into work plane, and let's actually build a bit of a composition here, because we've got a bit of time. So I'm going to create a new scene, and I'm going to come into my asset browser, and this is really handy because the asset browser has a whole bunch of things that you can use in your scenes, from objects to materials to texture maps, some of which we'll look at in the next setup. But it also has, if we search studio, a studio backdrop. Let me just delete this. And so instead of having to worry about, the old setup, some people might remember using like a plane and a bend deformer, this actually has been pre-created for us. And so we no longer have to worry about setting up a backdrop. I can copy my logo spline into here, and I can just reposition this up. And now already we have a bit of a backdrop, which is going to help us when we create this final composition or final design. Cool, so from here, let's turn this into geometry, and we're going to be doing it the exact same way as we did before. So I can take it out of that null. So it comes in automatically in a null, which is a bit of like a group inside of Cinema 4D. I'm going to select all of my paths, which are all of my individual splines. And there's a really quick way we can turn these into geometry instead of having to extrude every single one individually. We can come in, before you choose extrude, hit the option key and then select the extrude. And what that's going to do is that's going to throw every single one of those splines into an extrude for us. And then they're all selected. So I can come into my object and I can control the offset of every single extrude before I actually click off. So we've done that. Now we could even add like some rounding or some beveling to each individual piece. So if I change that to 2.3, we can create a more interesting result like this. If we don't want it to look like just the whole logo, we could separate it this way. And so I can actually see there are some slight issues with our geometry. And so you can see we're getting some of these lines. And this is down to the fact that each of our splines is set to adaptive on its points. And what adaptive means is the number of points will increase based on the amount that are needed. So on our sort of like curved areas here, we need more points to enable this curve. But on the straight areas, we're going to have less points. The trouble with that is it's Cinema 4D trying to figure out how many are needed. And so if I just sort of search path, I can select all of these. Let me just sort of move this out of the way. Select all of these, and I can fix this by coming into intermediate points, changing it to natural, and just increasing the number of points. So if I press MB, we now have a lot more subdivisions going on, and therefore we have a lot smoother geometry. So back to NA. Now we've fixed any of those issues that were going on here. Cool, so what can we do from here? How can we make this interesting and make this an animation? So already we've taken our Illustrator file, so we've taken that Nike logo and we've turned it into 3D geometry. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab that fracture again, because remember the fracture is the way that we can create MoGraph geometry. And then once we have MoGraph geometry, we can use our effectors and we can animate them. So let me just drag and drop every single piece into my fracture, and then I can tidy this all up just by hiding that there, just by sort of minimizing that. And then don't forget, we need to change this to explode segments, so everything is seen as an individual piece and animated separately. And now from here, we can do that same thing and we can use our effectors. But this time I'm going to grab a random effector. And now already, for those of you who are used to using Cinema 4D, will know that this is a really kind of stereotypical Cinema 4D setup. We've got our fractured pieces and we've randomized them. This is like C4D MoGraph random effector 101. So inside my random effector, what's actually happening? What is it doing? Well, it's taking each of our MoGraph pieces, each of these little pieces here, and it is randomizing their position on the X, Y, and Z axis up to 50 centimeters. And so the thing is, I don't really want this. I want it to only be randomized on this blue axis, which is our Z axis or Z axis. So I'm very quickly converting into an American speaking person. And then we can just increase and decrease this to generate a more interesting looking or sort of random varied result. So what I'm going to do, let's sort of add a bit more to our comp. Let's throw in a camera and let's look through our camera and let's adjust our focal length to something like 80. And then we can sort of reposition this and get more of a final composition look. And you're probably thinking, oh, Ellie, but we can see the end of our backdrop. Well, inside of our studio backdrop, we have the ability, if I just sort of pull this over, all of this is controlled and set up for us based on Espresso, I think. Yeah, Espresso. And so I can pull this and I can increase the depth of this. And so we're no longer going to see that edge or that lip. Let's come back into here. So how much do we want to do this? Let's maybe go 200 centimeters because I still want it to look like the logo. I want you to be able to tell that it's still the logo, but it's fractured. And so because we did what we did in Illustrator, we've been able to create this fracture geometry and we've been able to use a MoGraph setup similar to how we did in the first setup to generate a look like this. And then now, how do we animate this? We do the same thing. We can come into our random effector and we can use our fields to control where this is having an influence. So if I grab myself a linear field, again, we get this bounding box because we have our direction set to here. And then now what we can do is we can animate our logo pieces coming together. So it goes from fracture to complete. And again, this just takes 2 keyframes. So if I just increase my timeline, because I want to have a little bit more time to play with, I can animate my linear field from left to right. So that's going to be here, the position on my x-axis. I'm going to set a keyframe here, and then at frame 150, let's put it all the way over until it's connected, and then again, set another keyframe. And then now this is what we've just set up. And an extra little bit, how have I got? Well, I've got about 15 minutes. An extra little part of this that you could do would be inside of our extrude. So if we just select all our extrudes, we could come into our cap. So this is where our bevel is. And then we could animate the size of our bevel back down to 0 as it comes together. And then now it's literally gone from those fractured pieces to the full logo. And we're no longer going to see those lines because everything is perfectly matched together. Cool. So from there, I'm thinking we've got 12 minutes. So maybe I'll show the shoelace thing because it uses some extra little hacks or techniques. So let's just get this till it's our final design. And yeah, let's talk about how we'd create this shoelace. So if we just cut back over to here, we have this animated shoelace in. And again, this uses a couple of different techniques. For a start, we're going to draw this shoelace and turn it into 3D geometry. Then I'm going to show you really, really quickly how we can add these toggles at the end. I don't know what we call them in other countries, but in England, we call them toggles. And I'm going to show you how we can do this shoelace fabric material, again, using the asset browser nice and quickly. So let's create our shoelace. Let's come into our front view. And we're going to draw a spline, and it's going to be pretty much how you would draw a spline or a path inside of Illustrator. So this icon here, this tool, this is our spline pen. And if I click and click and click, I'm able to create points and draw points. Press escape, we can come out of it. What I can also do, if I click to grab my first point, let's actually just get rid of that one. Let's get rid of that guy. I'm going to click, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to click and hold. And so I'm still holding, I'm using a pen, but if you're using a mouse, if you're holding down your left mouse button, you can actually create curved splines with these Bezier handles. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to draw a shoelace spline like this. And it doesn't need to be perfect because everything can be adjusted and changed later on. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to draw my spline here and just make it nice and simple and something like that. Because we're not too fussed about it being perfect, because I'm sure you will all make it much more beautiful than I'll be able to. So inside of our spline, we've drawn our really rough spline. And the first thing I'm going to do, before we even reposition anything, I'm going to come into my spline type. So remember, this is where we changed our intermediate points on our other splines. And I'm going to change it to B-spline. And this is going to give me even more of a smooth spline. And now what you'll see is our points, our original points that we drew, aren't even on our spline. But what we can do is we can reposition them by just using my move tools here. So let's move this into the center and let's start to reposition a couple of these points. And again, you know, we want to do this stuff really quickly because we want to get to good stuff. We want to get to the animating stuff. So back in here, I'm just going to reposition some of these points. Maybe we can pull this one forwards. I don't want any intersecting going on really. And let's pull this forwards again and then out. And let's go up a little bit. And then we go up a little bit more. There we go. So I know it's not very interesting, you guys watching this, but we'll get something that we're a little bit happy with. That's fine for now. Let's leave it at that for now. Maybe move this one up so we don't get any more intersection going on. Okay, cool. So very quickly, we've created the shape. We've got an intersection here, but that's fine. That's fine. I'm sure you can all fix that for me. So how do we now turn this into 3D geometry? Because again, this is just a spline. So if I render it, we're not going to see anything. So the way that we turn this into geometry is we grab a sweep generator, drop our spline into our sweep, and then we need to actually choose the shape that's going to make up our geometry as well. And so because we're creating a shoelace, it's a bit like a cylinder. And so if you imagine like slicing a cylinder in half, that flat shape would be a circle. Maybe we change this to 5 centimeters. That's going to be our radius. And we're going to drop that inside of here. And so now we have, let's just get rid of that. We now have our shoelace inside of here. Again, we're not really getting enough subdivisions. So all of that can be defined inside of here. We can add some more subdivisions inside of our spline. And then we've got our shoelace. Really nice and really quickly. So how do we animate this? Well, inside of our sweep, we have a start and an end growth. And so if I start to pull this in and pull this along, you can see that we can animate these and we can create that shoelace animation. But we're not seeing, it's not looking too shoelacy yet. And that's because we don't have those end toggles. And so I really quickly want to show you how we can create those end toggles. And we can do it with a little bit of a trick inside of our caps. So remember, this is where we added that bevel on top of our fracture pieces and on top of our text. Well, what we can do, we can actually change this bevel shape to curve, and this is going to give us our curve graph, which we can then adjust and change to change the shape of our bevel. We can then add a size. So if let's do like a 2 centimeter size. And then if we extend the shape, we can use this height to extend out this bevel. So if we maybe change this to 12 centimeters, we're now seeing that we're getting that slight toggle shape already. And then what we can do, we can use this curve graph and we can move these handles to create a little bit of a lip. And now, if I just come out of here, we've really quickly used these bevel options to create a toggle on the start and the end, which makes this just look way more like a shoelace than it did before. And again, it's going to follow this start and end growth because we've already set it up as a bevel. God, very quickly running out of time. I have so much more that I want to show. Okay, let me quickly show you how we'd add the fabric material, and then I'm gonna like crack on and do the final setup really, really quickly. So how do we create our fabric material? Well, again, open up your material manager, grab your material and throw it onto the sweep. This is our shoelace. And again, we're going to take advantage of our asset browser. We're going to type the word fabric, and we already have some free fabric assets inside of our image media. And this one here, I like. This one to me looks very shoelacy. I know that's not a real word, but I've now said it twice, so I think it might be. So I'm going to drag and drop that, not into my luminance, into my color texture. And so now it's taken over. Let's get rid of my asset browser. And it's now being projected onto my shoelace. But you're probably thinking, Ellie, it's looking a little bit odd. And yes, I'd agree with you. That's because we need to control and change slightly the projection length of our fabric material. And so if we come into here, if I adjust my length V, that is this long sort of length here, to something really low, let's go maybe like 4. We can now see that we're getting a better projection, and we could even increase the projection on here. And so now let me just let's add a little bit more of this so we can see it a little bit clearer, and push that over there. So we can now see that we're getting a little bit better of a representation now. Maybe even we can go to 3. But what if we wanted to change the color of this? And I know you're probably thinking the toggles look a bit weird. Yes, they do, but we'll fix that in a sec as well. But what if we want to change the color of this? How do we do that? Well, we can come into our material, and this is based on a texture, but we can actually change the color of these textures. All we have to do is this little arrow drop down, choose Colorizer, and then what it's going to do, if we click our little thumbnail here, it throws a gradient over the top of your texture. And so then we can actually double click and we can choose different colors, and we can tweak these handles to tweak the look of this shoelace. So we might even, let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see it a little bit clearer. So we've now created our fabric texture just by adding this fabric from the asset browser inside of here, and then adding a colorizer and adjusting the projection length. We can even add more detail. So if you're worried about things looking a little bit more detailed and realistic, we can actually enable our bump channel, and we can throw in this same texture, which is actually, I think, a bump texture, inside of here, and then we can increase our strength, and it's going to add a little bit of surface detail on top of here as well, based on that exact same texture. Finally, the last bit is just to fix the toggles, and we can do that again by using our selection. So remember, this is how we can assign different materials to different aspects of our geometry. If we have a blue for the toggles, if we pull that just before our fabric texture, we can use the shell selection. So the shell is going to be just this area here, by typing S. And then now we have our toggles on this side on our different bevel options. So if we come into here, I can show you on the end as well. We've used our selections to add that fabric texture and that toggles. And with a couple of tweaks, we can actually create this type of effect just by animating that fracture or that linear field, and then animating that start and end growth to create a style just like that. Before we move on, I do want to ask, is there any questions before I very quickly go through the next setup, which is the final setup?
Looks pretty good to me. I mean, just lots of praise and worshipful things about your stuff that you're showing.
You're all too kind. You're all too
It's not me. I didn't say anything. It's all them.
Is it all just you, Chad, in the questions area? Okay, cool. So I'm very aware that it is the hour, but I want to really quickly show you a bit of a fake cloth setup, and we'll run through it relatively quickly because it is quick setup anyway, because I think it just looks so cool. And anyone in the world of Maxon would have heard about the cloth system that's come recently inside of Cinema 4D 2023. Unfortunately, Lite doesn't have simulation or dynamics. And so I wanted to see if I could create a fake cloth effect inside of Lite. And we kind of can. And I'm not going to pretend that it's better than the original cloth system, but it's still pretty cool what you can generate inside of this version. So let's absolutely fly through this. So we're going to create a plane. This is going to be our piece of cloth. And I'm also going to show you how you can combine it with like Photoshop graphics as well. So this is our piece of cloth. How do we turn this into, or how do we animate this? Well, we've been spending this whole hour talking about MoGraph geometry and effectors. But what we can do is we can actually use these effectors to deform our geometry without even needing to do like a MoGraph setup. And so the way that we do that is if we grab our random effector, I'm going to make it a child of my plane or whatever you want to deform and animate. I'm going to go into my random effector. Let's just make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Into Deformer, I'm going to change it to one of these options. So we can deform based on the object, the point, or the polygons. I'm going to choose polygons. And automatically, we can see that we're getting a little bit of a strange effect, but something is happening. So what it's doing is the random effector is deforming our polygons based on this X, Y, and Z position. So up to a value of 50 centimeters. And it's not looking like a lot because there's a few things we can do to influence the look of this. The first thing we do want to do is we want to come into our plane, because if I go to NB, and that's going to give us our segments or our subdivisions, we can see this is very, very low poly. We don't have a lot of segments. We have 10 by 10. So we're not getting a really smooth type of design or deformation. So what we can do is we can increase this to 100 by 100. And I mean, it's looking a little bit crazy, but that's fine. Because from here, now we know we've got more subdivisions, we can come back into our random and we can start to change a few different things in here to start to get a more cloth-like look. So the first thing we want to do is actually come to the Effector tab, and we have a random mode. So by default, the random effector is set to random mode. It's going to randomize everything. But there are two that have inbuilt animation without having to set up keyframes. The first is noise. So let me just sort of just add some more frames. If I press play, we can see I'm not doing anything. I've not set up keyframes. This random noise mode is actually animating based on our parameters here. So based on our sort of polygons and our positional movement. The one that I'd prefer actually, and the other one that has some auto animation, is Turbulence. And this goes a little bit crazy, but it's cool, it's fine. Because we can actually change this, we can actually control this by adjusting my animation speed. So if I change this to 5%, we now have a much smoother looking animation. But again, we're getting a little bit of a strange result. And so what we can do is we can scale up our turbulent noise to something like 200%, and now we're getting a much smoother, a much larger scale turbulent effect happening on our plane. So those are things that we want to control. But now what we want to do is we actually want to change our position, because what we need to remember is the animation is being based on this positional parameters. So if I set these all to 0, nothing's going to happen. And so let me just add maybe 90 centimeters on here. So we're only having our polygons move up and down on the y-axis. And so we're getting this sort of movement here, and we can even add some rotation as well. So let's add maybe like some rotation in here. So we're getting a little bit more of a nice smooth effect. But what you're probably noticing is we're getting some overlapping of polygons. We're getting some weird like rigid things. So how do we make this even smoother? Well, we can throw it into a subdivision surface. And for anyone who doesn't know what it's going to do, it's going to subdivide our plane 2 times. So if I drop my plane inside of here, we're no longer going to get any of those things. And you'll notice it's a little bit slower now, and that's because it's very high poly. So if I go NB, we can see we have a really like dense mesh, but it's going to help us create that really nice cloth-like smooth animation. And so already, if you take like the very first instance of this animation to now, it's looking very cloth-like. And because we're using the random effector, we can also use fields. So if I add a linear field, we can now control where this cloth is having an effect based on my field. And so this is a really, really, like, I know we've sort of like flown through it because I don't want to overrun too much. I know people have places to be, but I just thought I'd show this. And I really love it. I really love this effect. And I think it looks really amazing. The fact it's only in C4D Lite. And the final part of this, the final part to make it look really cloth-like is the texture. So let's grab myself a material. So we just double clicked, and all this is just standard materials that I've been doing today. I'm going to throw it onto my plane. I'm going to actually double click it, and I want to show you how you can add like Photoshop graphics. So if you're a bit of like a 2D graphic designer and you create things much better than this, I'm sure, inside of Photoshop, then you can actually add these to your textures inside of C4D. And so very quickly we can take 2D graphics and we can animate them using Cinema 4D Lite. So how do we grab this texture? So let me first of all find my texture. Where is this? Here we go, I found it. So I'm going to throw that inside of here. And now we can see we have our texture in here, and it's animating along with my cloth animation. And then back inside my asset browser, I'm going to take another one of these fabric designs and I'm going to drop it into my bump map. And let's maybe go with this one here. And so let's increase this just so it's much more visible for you all on the stream. And so now what we've done is we've thrown on a fabric texture inside of our bump, and we've thrown on our own like Photoshop graphic texture that we've created onto here. And now we have our cloth simulation, sort of fake cloth simulation, inside of here, inside of only Cinema 4D Lite. And I thought, like, I wanted to overrun just to show this because I think this is really cool. And like a lot of people are talking about cloth inside of main C4D or the full version. So I did want to try and recreate a type of version of this. And yeah, again, a very small and very quick setup, just with a couple of things inside of here. And again, don't forget, all of this stuff you can save, throw into After Effects, change your renderer to current, and then you can render it out, or you can do whatever you want to do in After Effects. You can add some like red giant glow stuff, or you can do some color grading before you render that out. And the link is very, very good. So do we have any questions? So I apologize for overrunning, but I definitely wanted to get through all three of those things setups.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
think we're caught up on questions.
Lovely.
But yeah, it's great. I like it. Amazing job again, Elly. As always.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Yeah, one of the common.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say one of the common threads in the comments is, you know, people are blown away by like what you've been able to make C4D Lite do, and a lot of things like a lot of us, myself included, didn't realize were included with Lite, and then a lot of like the creative things like the cloth are just such an innovative and creative approach to those things, and it's like really cool to see like how many different ways you could do things. And so yeah, most of the comment threads, that was like a running thing throughout, is that people were really impressed by like your creativity and what you were able to make Lite do.
Ah, thanks everyone. That's so sweet and lovely. I'm gonna turn my camera back on so I can show you my big smiley face. No, I really wanted to show, like, it's such a fun challenge as well when it's like, oh hey, can you show what you can do in Lite, having like being blessed with the tools that we have inside of Cinema and being blessed with like Redshift as a renderer. You have to think outside of the box, and it's great to see how you can combine not only After Effects but Illustrator. Think of things inside of Illustrator that are going to aid you when it comes to animating or bringing in your Photoshop textures that you create as like a graphic designer, and throw them on something like this and animate them, and very quickly you've got another like string to your bow, as we say in the UK. You've got another like asset inside of your workflow, so you can say yes to those 3D projects. now, everyone.
Did you have the cloth thing at Max? I don't remember seeing you do that at Max.
I didn't do it at Max. I thought I would add
that's pretty
little
cool.
extra, some extra little spice
extra
to this
bonus.
one.
Yeah, very, very
Also,
cool.
thank you. Also, just before, for anyone who is left, if you are, thank you so much for letting me ramble on. This one here, this guy here, hopefully everyone can still see my screen. I've actually just recorded a full tutorial on this. It's a 2-part tutorial, and it's going to go live pretty much at the end of this session. I'm going to make it go live, and it's everything from the first part is like modeling and animating this, so a slightly slower version of what I went through over this last hour. And then the second part is showing you how you can light and texture and render it, so you can create a nice pretty setup inside. And again, that's all inside of Lite and all inside of After Effects. So yeah, that will be going live in the next few minutes.
That's awesome.
Little promo. Yeah, so that's me done. My takeover, mic drop complete.
That was epic. Before we go, can I talk about a quick second about next week's thing? Because next week we have a very special episode of Demystifying. We're going to have Nate Haight, who is the product manager of Trapcode stuff and also Universe. But he's going to be coming on to talk about some new features in particular that were released. And I just wanted to point that out because on the website, we made the copy on the website that talks about next week before those features were released. So it's like really vague, like we're going to be talking about particle things. But now that those features are out, we could talk about like the new UI graphs, the new color gradients, and I'll be showing some stuff as well in Trapcode particular. So if you're into particles and designing with form and particular, check it out.
Sweet.
That sounds very cool. A little teaser there. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their Monday and rest of their week. And yeah, we'll see you for the final part next Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, yeah.
See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.